Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, it might sound like every child's dream, a school day which ends early on a Friday. But for working parents, it can be a nightmare. Some English schools are blaming budget shortages for having to cut their working week short. So today, parents and pupils descended on Westminster to protest about the changes. Among them were Birmingham Labour MP Jess Phillips and her 10-year-old son, Danny. Jane Deeth reports.
A school trip with a difference, marching on Downing Street over school funding. Labour MP Jess Phillips' son Danny, pointedly left outside number 10, will be in school 4.5 days a week come September. The kids at his school, Kings Heath Primary in Birmingham, were up early for Westminster this morning.
We're really sad that school has to close for half a day of school.
Do you understand why it's closing?
Yeah, because it's not getting enough money.
I hope the government will understand that they need to give more money to schools so we can stay open.
It kind of feels like it puts them at a disadvantage when the norm and the majority of kids are having full 5 days a week education.
The news is being dominated by Brexit, by the Tory leadership race, and this is massive news, and it needs to be heard about.
Bringing home time on a Friday forward to 1 p.m. will, in the long run, save this school more than £100,000 a year. The head teacher says she's cut everything else she can.
We're going to do as much as we can to mitigate in terms of looking at our curriculum and how we can deliver it differently. But there is absolutely no doubt that 4.5 days a week is not the same as 5 days.
And how does that make you feel as a head teacher?
It makes me feel really angry that we have got to this position. Children have a right to a full-time education, and they should be having a full-time education. And on the other hand, it makes me very sad and very upset, actually. I've been head teacher here a long time. This is a lovely school, and it's a devastating thing to have to do.
A dozen Birmingham head teachers are already closing early on a Friday. At this primary, the school run is at 12:30.
I would rather they save jobs and cut the day than get rid of jobs, because then at the end of the day that affects the children more, not having the teachers.
What are you going to do this afternoon?
She had to spend time with me today, so this is time for her to say, I'm spending time with Daddy now, quality time with me.
At St Peter and St Paul, school was out at 2 o'clock today.
I think there's an awful lot of nans on a Friday that pick up the children. Otherwise, Mum would not be able to do full time.
The cuts and everything from the government, it's a pain, so they've had to make the money back somehow, and that's how they've done it. So I support that 100%. I think the government needs to get a grip on the whole situation.
The government is firmly not shouldering any responsibility. It says a primary school class in Birmingham receives around £10,000 a year more than the national average. Enough money, it says, to pay for a full 5-day week. Birmingham Council warned today there are more head teachers in the city talking about cutting half a day, that they've been put in an unacceptable position because there isn't enough money to go round.
Jane Deeth there in Birmingham. Well, earlier I went down to Downing Street to speak to Jess Phillips, and I began by asking her why she'd taken part in the protest.
Well, I mean, as a parent, I am bereft that my son's school can no longer afford to stay open for 5 days a week. And as a politician and a constituency MP, there's 3 schools in my constituency that have already cut their hours, and there's 26 schools in Birmingham and 250 schools across the country. And I just think we've got to show the government that this isn't good enough.
The government's response is that Birmingham schools in your constituency are getting above the national average funding. So might this be a question of local mismanagement rather than a national problem?
I mean, that's what the government want us to believe. They want to basically pass the buck of their responsibility to provide universal education 5 days a week to our children onto head teachers. Now, if 250 head teachers are poorly managing, what are the Department for Education doing about that exactly?
Of course, the Department for Education says that schools have to educate kids for a minimum of 380 sessions a year. Presumably, your son's school are doing that. They're doing their legal requirements.
I should imagine they will do the legal minimum, yes.
And your contention is that it has to be better than that?
Of course it has to be. As a mum, I don't want the legal minimum for my child if other children are able to get beyond that. At the end of the day, my son is in year 5, he'll go into year 6 next year, and he will be doing his SATs, and he'll be doing his SATs on 20 days less tuition than children in other schools. How is that fair? And how is it that they think it's okay just to now set the standard that children don't have to be in school 5 days a week? If that's the government policy, that children no longer have to be in school 5 days a week, then they should just come out and say it.
There is a bit of an ignoble tradition of politicians deploying their children to make a political point. I mean, I hate to mention John Gummer and feeding the beef burger to his child. Was there any nervousness in your mind about bringing your son in for this?
Absolutely. I was frightened for his security, for one thing, and I don't like my children. They're not part of my political life. They are individuals entirely, with their own views and their own opinions. But this is directly affecting my son, and all of his school friends were coming here today. He wanted to be part of this.
Boris Johnson has pledged an extra £5 billion a year for schools. Does that reassure you? Do you think that might reverse the cuts, as he says?
It absolutely does give me hope, actually. Those are the sorts of figures that we need to be hearing about.
You're a Boris Johnson backer?
I'm definitely not a Boris Johnson backer, because, in fact, the reality is that this pledge is not going to come in for at least a number of years. It will make absolutely no difference to me as a parent or the thousands of children that are already being affected by that.
Now, this was a good stunt, but obviously you'd be making a more powerful point if you were actually yourself on the brink of power. Given that Labour is now languishing in 4th place in the opinion polls, is it time for a change of leader?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't pretend that I feel comfortable being 4th in the polls, and there is a fundamental problem. What I worry about desperately at the moment is that the Labour Party doesn't seem to recognise both losses in European elections, losses in local elections, now this 4th position in the poll rating. We're in a dire situation.
So time to change the leader, or think about changing the leader?
Well, I mean, I think that Jeremy Corbyn has got to seriously look at whether the country is backing him.
You are uncharacteristically not answering the question. So, should Jeremy Corbyn consider his position?
Yes.
Would you challenge him for the job, push comes to shove?
My gosh, I'm so tired. A day with all those children.
Jess Phillips, thanks very much.